sword howl resounded, and then a ray of light appeared behind Nanjing. A flying sword from the sword gourd. One of the black-robed figures suddenly stopped and grabbed ahead of himself. The flying sword was caught. However, it still pierced his forehead. It was fast. Too fast. It was so fast that he could only grab it, but he couldn't stop it from stabbing into his forehead. He'd been a little slow, and that little bit had cost him his life. And Nanjing stopped, and Yang Yi appeared by her side. As he gazed at her, his heart hurt. Her left arm was gone, and it had been forcefully pulled off by force. Besides that, her entire body was covered in injuries, especially the injury on her stomach. It was too deep. It was a reunion after a long time, and Nanjing gazed at him in silence. Yang Yi grabbed her right hand with his left hand, and then his primordial violet energy surged into her. At the same time, the eternal energy hidden deep within him started to circulate and flow through his arm into a Nanjing. Once the primordial violet energy and eternal energy surged into her, her injuries immediately recovered rapidly at a visible rate, and it was quite terrifying indeed. Meanwhile, four black-clothed figures appeared not too far behind them. Yang Yi spoke softly. "How did this happen to you?" She replied, "I'm still alive. Still alive." Yang Yi took a deep breath, and then he gazed at the black-clothed figures. A moment later, he appeared before one of them, and his sword left its sheath. The sword domain. 3 swings. As soon as it descended, the black-clothed man was blasted over 10 kilometers away while blood sprayed incessantly from his mouth. And once he stopped himself, a flying sword pierced through his forehead. Hiss! His body exploded apart. An instant kill. Suddenly, a black-clothed man spoke solemnly. "Who are you? Why are you interfering in my Azura Hall's business?" Yang Yi didn't waste his breath and just appeared before that black-clothed man. And then he swung his sword. 3 swings with the sword domain. The black-clothed man had been ready and was about to attack, but a black seal suddenly appeared above him. The seal of suppression. As soon as it appeared, a wave of powerful black light enveloped the black-clothed man, and then his cultivation instantly descended. The black-clothed man was horrified, and then the sword descended. Hiss! In just an instant, Yang Ye's sword had descended and sliced him into 2. Blood and internal organs sprayed all over. In just a short while, Yang Yi had killed 3 black-clothed men. The last 2 exchanged glances, and then they immediately flew in the direction they'd come from. The strength Yang Yi revealed was too terrifying. Yang Yi was about to pursue them when a Nanjing shook her head. "It wasn't they who injured me." Yang Yi shook his head. "But I want to kill." She glanced at him and stopped holding him back. Yang Yi looked toward the distance. The black-clothed men had vanished from his vision. Yang Yi didn't chase after them and just closed his eyes. A sword howl resounded, and then a sword appeared in the distant sky. The seal of suppression appeared along with the sword. A seal and a sword. Hiss! The black-clothed man hadn't even been able to react before he was killed by Yang Ye's flying sword. At the same time, a flying sword appeared behind the other black-clothed man. It hadn't been able to kill him, but it did heavily injure him. An instant later, another sword and the seal of suppression appeared above him. Suddenly, a wave of powerful energy rippled out of the black vortex. Bang! Yang Ye's seal of suppression and the sword were instantly blasted away, and then a black face appeared before them. It glanced coldly at them, and then a huge black hand stretched out from the area. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly. He was about to attack when Wu and I, who was playing Go on the Cliff at the southern desolate lands, suddenly looked up, and then he tapped his finger in their direction. A Go piece shot through space and vanished into the sky. In the sky above Yang Yi and in Nanjing, the same Go piece slammed against the hand. Bang! The hand exploded apart. The eyes on the black face narrowed as it looked up into the sky. Meanwhile, a voice came from above. "You can fuck off now." It was Wu Ni's voice. The black face looked in that direction for a long time, and then it laughed coldly. "A dead overlord is still so haughty, huh?" Suddenly, another Go piece appeared in the air, and it slammed directly against the face. In an instant, a shrill cry resounded from there, and it was absolutely horrifying. You? A shocked voice came from within the vortex. Fuck off. Suddenly, a voice came from the same area, and then the area shook violently and almost exploded apart. Suddenly, an ethereal middle-aged man appeared in the sky. He bowed slightly toward the distance. Greetings, Senior Wu and I. I'm the guardian of Hell World. My ancestor hopes you're doing well. On the cliff at the southern desolate lands, Wu and I spoke indifferently. He's not dead. The middle-aged man laughed embarrassedly. Not yet. Wu and I put the go piece down and said, Tell me what happened. The middle-aged man glanced at a Nanjing and said, The junior hall master of Azura Hall teased her during a competition, and she punched him to the point he was crippled. So, Azura Hall? How laughable. Suddenly, Wu and I vanished from the cliff, and he was not too far away from the middle-aged man when he appeared again. The middle-aged man immediately became extremely vigilant when he saw Wu and I. The old man before him had been an extraordinarily terrifying existence all those years ago. Even if Wu and I was dead now, Wu and I still wasn't someone he could offend. Wu and I spoke coldly. That piece of trash Azura Hall couldn't accept its defeat? The middle-aged man smiled with embarrassment but didn't dare to say anything. He didn't want to offend the Azura Hall either. Suddenly, Wu and I gazed at Yang. Kid? She was bullied. So what do you think should be done? Yang replied indifferently. Kill their ancestors and everyone else. Wu and I had a grin on the corner of his eyes. You're brave. All right, then let's do that. Come. Suddenly, the middle-aged man said, Senior Wu and I, why you can't go inside? Wu and I suddenly stretched out his right hand, and it instantly wrapped around the middle-aged man's throat. In an instant, the middle-aged man turned even more ethereal. Wu and I looked him in the eyes. So you don't want to give me any face because you think I'm dead? The middle-aged man hurriedly said, Of course now. But senior, the rules? Rules. A wisp of disdain curled up onto the corners of Wu Ni's mouth. That old geezer who set that rule had to address me as senior. Yet you're talking about fucking rules to me? I'll spare you out of consideration for your ancestor. But I'll kill even your ancestor if you don't stop making noise. As soon as he finished speaking, he tossed the middle-aged man away like trash. Wu and I waved his right hand, and then both Yang and a Nanjing entered the black vortex with him. The middle-aged man glanced at his hands with bitterness in his eyes. He was a Peak 3 World Realm expert, but he wasn't even able to fight back before the old man. Not even in the slightest. The old man could have killed him in an instant. Suddenly, a voice resounded in his mind. Now you've seen how terrifying he is? The middle-aged man laughed bitterly. Ancestor, I was almost killed. The voice said, All those years ago, even destiny once feared him. If it was all those years ago, Azura Hall would have been damned from just a word from him. The middle-aged man asked, What about now? The voice replied, Why don't you go take a look for yourself? The middle-aged man laughed bitterly and asked, Ancestor, if he was so terrifying, then how did he die? Was it his lifespan? Not at all. The voice continued. He died because he was too strong. It's like a marquis in a kingdom. When a marquis' strength is too strong, do you think the emperor will let him live? That's how the world is. If you're too weak, you deserve death. But if you're too strong, you deserve death too. He once said something that became very famous. If you're going to be strong, then be invincible. The middle-aged man seemed to be lost in thought. If you're going to be strong, then be invincible. A long time passed, and he was about to leave when he suddenly looked up. A middle-aged sword cultivator in a cloud-white robe was walking slowly through the air. The middle-aged man frowned. Outsiders are prohibited from entering this place. The sword cultivator glanced at him and said, I want to go in. The middle-aged man's eyes narrowed slightly as he clenched his right hand. I'll repeat myself one last time. Entry isn't allowed. Understand? Suddenly, a ray of light flashed, and then his eyes opened wide because a sword was pressed against his forehead. He was stunned on the spot. The sword cultivator glanced at him. Too weak. He lowered his sword once he finished speaking. The sword cultivator walked away. The world may be vast, but I roam free with my sword. Who can't I kill with my sword? Favorite, the middle-aged man froze on the spot. A single attack. He hadn't even been able to stop a single attack. Such a sword cultivator existed in this world. The middle-aged man broke out in cold sweat. When Xianxia opened his eyes, he was in a boundless mountain range, and there was a huge palace deep within it. Imposing. That was the impression Xianxia had about it. It was the first time he'd seen such an imposing palace. At the top of the palace was two pitch-black characters. Azura. The entire palace emanated a ghastly aura. Wu and I glanced at the palace and gazed at Xianxia. You do it! Xianxia glanced at him. Xianxia didn't mind because he'd never feared anyone. Xianxia's figure appeared before the palace, and then he walked slowly in its direction. Wu and I suddenly asked in Nanjing, You chose him? She nodded. Yes. He nodded. He acts like a man. And Nanjing nodded slightly. While her face remained without any expression, she was quite happy because the old man acknowledged Xianxia. Acknowledgement. After she met the old man, she knew how picky the old man was, and few in the world were able to make him take a liking to them. Meanwhile, Wu and I continued. While his natural talent isn't great, his character and mentality are extremely good, especially the ruthlessness deep down in his bones. He's someone destined for great things. Moreover, he's quite loyal, so you can depend on each other on your future paths. And Nanjing nodded slightly and remained silent. Xianxia was right in front of the palace now. Xianxia thought for a moment as he gazed at the imposing palace, and then he swung his sword. Hiss! A ray of sword energy flashed and struck the palace. It hadn't even gotten close to the palace when a wave of mysterious energy shattered it into bits. Meanwhile, a middle-aged man in black armor appeared in front of Xianxia. He sized up Xianxia and frowned slightly. The true Dao realm? Xianxia replied indifferently. Tell your junior hall master to get out here. I'm going to kill him. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. Who are you? This true Dao realm cultivator actually dared to openly attack the Azura Hall, so he refused to believe the man before him was someone ordinary. Who was he? Xianxia shook his head and didn't waste his breath. He just appeared above the middle-aged man, and then his sword descended. Hiss! Space was instantly sliced into bits. Killing intent flashed through the man's eyes, and then he twisted his right hand upward and clawed at Xianxia's sword. It was like he was clawing the entire world. However, in this instant, a pitch-black seal appeared above him, and then a ray of black light enveloped him. The man was immediately suppressed to a lower realm of cultivation. He was astounded, and he immediately clenched his other fist and slammed it upward. Bang! Bang! 2 explosions resounded, and he was blasted backward until he arrived before the palace's doors. He looked down at his hands, and he noticed that they had been sliced into bits. He'd lost both his hands. Xianxia ignored the middle-aged man and glanced at the palace. Is the junior hall master of Azura Hall such a coward? Who do you think you are? Suddenly, a disdainful voice resounded from nearby, and then a young man in a violet robe appeared before Xianxia. He sized up Xianxia. Where did you come from, bastard? How dare you cause trouble at my Azura Hall? Xianxia suddenly vanished on the spot. The young man's expression changed because a powerful aura enveloped him, and then a ray of sword energy descended. 3 swings with the sword domain. It was absolutely terrifying, especially when the seal of suppression was included. The young man was horrified. At the critical moment, a pitch-black shield emerged from within him, and it enveloped the young man. When Xianxia's sword struck it, it shook violently, and then countless rays of black light surged from it. Bang! Xianxia was blasted backward. He only stopped after being pushed almost 300 m back. Xianxia glanced at his trembling hands, and then he gazed at the black shield. A divine treasure. It was an actual divine treasure. Xianxia grinned as he thought of something. Meanwhile, the young man ridiculed, the true Tao realm. Your sword may be good, but what can you do to me? Come, don't blame me for bullying you. I'll let you attack 10 times. 10 times. Yang Yi glanced at the young man and patted his chest, and then a white little head emerged from there. It was Snowy. Snowy glanced at the surroundings, and then her gaze descended onto the shield. Her eyes immediately lit up, and then she waved at it. However, the pitch-black shield didn't react at all. Snowy frowned at the sight of this and glanced at Yang Yi. A moment later, she inhaled in its direction, causing the black light it emanated to dim down slightly. After that, the shield started to tremble violently. Sprite destruction. Snowy was destroying its spirit. Actually, Snowy would usually not use that because it would erase the intelligence of a treasure. However, the situation was different now. The person who owned the shield was fighting Yang Yi, and that was something she refused to tolerate. She didn't care if it was a divine treasure. If it dared to go against Yang Yi, she would destroy them all. At this moment, the shield was quite afraid. Yang Ye's sword was very powerful, but it could stop Yang Ye's attacks. However, it couldn't endure Snowy, because Snowy could destroy its intelligence. Suddenly, Snowy waved at it again. Obviously, she was asking if it was coming to her. Otherwise, she was going to inhale again. The shield hesitated for quite some time, and then it suddenly struggled free of the young man, destroyed the link between them, and shot over to Snowy. Snowy grinned, and then she grabbed it and went into the primordial pagoda. The young man was stunned. Utterly stunned. He couldn't sense the divine treasure anymore. He couldn't sense it at all. A short while later, the young man recovered from his shock and gazed at Yang Yi before howling with rage. "Little bastard! Hand it over now. Otherwise I'll—" Suddenly, Yang Yi appeared before him, and then a sword slammed down. The young man was horrified. He quickly formed a strange seal with both hands and slammed them upward. A wave of powerful energy rippled out of the seal, but it was obliterated as soon as it came into contact with Yang Ye's sword. The sword descended. Bang! The young man was blasted away, but at the instant his figure was blasted away, a hand clamped down on his throat. Yang Yi held the young man by the throat and slammed him into the ground. Boom! The ground exploded apart. But Yang Yi wasn't satisfied. He kicked the young man's nether regions without holding back at all. Crack! It was the sound of his balls shattering. A shrill cry resounded, and then the young man's eyes opened wide as he curled up on the ground. Yang Yi raised the young man up and said, "How dare you tease my wife and send people to kill her? How many lives do you think you have?" Yang Yi slammed his fist against the young man's stomach. Bang! The young man was slammed to the ground and blasted open a huge hole there. But that wasn't the end of it. Yang Yi raised him up again, and then went over to Wu and Nanjing. But Yang Yi was stunned when he arrived there. The corpses of 3 old men were in front of them. The young man in Yang Ye's grasp turned pale from fright when he saw the corpses. And Nanjing glanced at Yang Yi and said, "They wanted to attack you, so Master killed them." Yang Yi was quite embarrassed at this point. He'd been wondering why Azura Hall hadn't sent anyone at him when he'd beaten up the young man like that. Now he understood why. It wasn't that they hadn't, the problem was that those people were dead. Yang Yi shook his head, smiled, and tossed the young man over to Nanjing. "Kill him yourself." She glanced at Yang Yi. "You do it." Yang Yi smiled and was about to kill him when a wave of powerful pressure seeped out from Azura Hall, and it pressed down upon Yang Yi. It seemed capable of obliterating the world. A supreme expert. A voice came from within the Azura Hall. "Why don't you try killing him?" Wu Enai didn't help suppress the pressure. He just glanced at Yang Yi, and no one knew what he was thinking. Suddenly, Yang Ye's sword descended. Hiss! The young man's head flew up into the air, and then Yang Yi tapped with his finger and made it descend before the entrance to Azura Hall. Yang Yi gazed at the palace and said, "I killed him. Bite me." As he spoke, he moved closer to Wu and I. Silence. The entire Azura Hall instantly fell silent. It had never suffered such a humiliation. Actually, as far as Azura Hall was concerned, The fate of its junior hall master wasn't that important. After all, he was a weakling, and he would have no status in Azura Hall if it wasn't for the hall master. However, no matter how they disdained him, they would never allow someone to kill him, especially right in front of Azura Hall. Face. Yang Yi had killed their junior hall master right outside their door, and that was an absolute insult to Azura Hall. An old man suddenly appeared outside Azura Hall. He glanced at Yang Yi, but his gaze quickly moved to Wu and I. He glanced at Wu and I, and then he appeared in front of Wu and I. Unfathomable. That was what Yang Yi sensed from the old man. The old man glanced at Wu and I. "What's your name?" "My name." A wisp of disdain arose on the corners of Wu Ni's mouth. "You're not qualified to know my name." Wu and I pressed his palm down. The space around the old man instantly froze. It truly froze. At the same time, a wave of powerful energy raged through the area like a storm. The old man's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he stretched his right hand forward and waved it lightly. It caused the energy to immediately calm down, and then he pushed his palm forward. Bang! A wave of terrifying energy rippled out of the old man's palm like the tide, and it locked onto Wu and I. Moreover, there were no fluctuations in space as it passed through. It was like the energy was passing through space and instantly arriving before Wu and I. Yang Ye's eyes lit up from the sight of this. If he could grasp that technique, his flying swords would grow even more terrifying. A wisp of disdain arose on Wu Ni's lips. World shuttling. How laughable, it's a technique I created, but you're actually using it against me. How fucking laughable. Wu and I raised his hand and slammed his fist forward. Boom! The old man's energy was instantly dispersed. At the same time, he seemed like he'd been struck by a sledgehammer and was blasted over 3 kilometers away. As soon as he stopped himself, a wisp of blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. Moreover, that hand he used to attack Wu and I shattered into bits. A single punch. Yang Yi glanced at Wu and I, and he felt that the old man's strength was really terrifying. The old man glanced at his own arm, and then he looked up at Wu and I. "Who are you?" This time, seriousness and fear filled the old man's eyes. Wu and I glanced coldly at him. "I'm bullying you by acting against you, but that's because your Azura Hall did it first." He pointed at a Nanjing and said, "I don't want to waste time. Go on. Tell me who sent people to kill this disciple of mine." The old man glanced at a Nanjing. At this moment, he knew why such a terrifying expert had come to Azura Hall. The old man glanced at the junior hall master's corpse, shook his head, and gazed at Wu and I. "It was my Azura Hall's mistake, and we're willing to apologize to her. Suddenly, Wu and I interrupted the old man. "I asked you who sent people to kill her. Didn't you hear me?" The old man laughed bitterly. "The culprit has already been killed by you." Wu and I glanced at the area before him. There were 3 corpses there from experts he'd killed earlier. Wu and I gazed at a Nanjing. "If you're unhappy, I'll destroy the Azura Hall for you." The old man's countenance turned quite pale when he heard this. His collision with Wu and I told him that the old man before him possessed the strength to destroy Azura Hall. And Nanjing gazed at the old man. The old man hesitated for a moment and said, "My Azura Hall was it wrong, and we're willing to give you a divine treasure as compensation. Please accept it." He tapped his finger forward while an unsightly expression covered his face, and then a pitch-black armor appeared before a Nanjing. The old man said, "This is the Azura armor, the ultimate treasure of my Azura Hall. It can resist the full strength of 3 World Realm experts, and ordinary 2 World Realm experts can do nothing to it. You're an extraordinary genius, and you'll be invincible in your realm of cultivation once you possess this armor." And Nanjing glanced at it and took it. The old man heaved a sigh of relief when he saw her accept it. If she refused, Azura Hall would have to fight to the death. While they had a very slim chance at victory, they would still try. And Nanjing gazed at Wu and I, and the latter nodded slightly. "Let's go." Suddenly, Snowy emerged from Yang Ye's chest. As soon as the little fellow made an appearance, everyone here gazed at her, and the old man was absolutely stunned. A sprite progenitor. How could he be unable to discern that the white little fellow before him was a sprite progenitor? A sprite progenitor. The old man's hands were trembling. If he wasn't afraid of Wu and I, he would have tried to take Snowy by now. Suddenly, Snowy looked down at Azura Hall, and then her eyes lit up before she waved her paw. Bang! A huge white dragon shot up into the air. The spirit vein. Moreover, it was an immortal vein. A real immortal vein. The immortal vein glanced at everyone here, and then its gaze descended upon Snowy. Snowy leaped up onto its head, and then grabbed its horn and urged it over to Xianxia. The white dragon hesitated for a moment but didn't resist in the end. Right when it was about to be dragged into the primordial pagoda, the old man finally recovered from his shock and quickly obstructed Snowy and the dragon's path. He glanced at Snowy, hesitated for a moment, and asked, "W, what are you doing?" Snowy blinked and patted the dragon's head. She was saying that she was taking the dragon. The old man hesitated and said, "This is Azura Hall." Azura Hall? Snowy blinked, shook her head, and then patted the dragon's head to say that the dragon belonged to her. The old man laughed bitterly. It really belongs to my Azura Hall." Snowy shook the dragon's horn lightly, and then jumped off to the side. She pointed at the old man and then pointed at herself. Obviously, she was asking who it wanted to stay with. The white dragon glanced at the old man, glanced at Snowy, and then moved towards Snowy. Snowy grinned and then immediately dragged it into the primordial pagoda. The old man was stunned for a long time. In the end, he gazed at Wu and I, but the latter didn't even spare him a glance. The old man was furious. After all, that was utterly shameless. Moreover, they were being so shameless in such an open manner. The Azura armor and Azura shield were gone. Now, even their immortal vein was gone. Wasn't that no different than destroying Azura Hall? Wu and I glanced at Xianxia and Nanjing. "Let's go." He waved his right hand and vanished on the spot with them. The old man's face was covered in bitterness. The Azura Hall could be said to have been completely plundered. A long time passed before the old man cupped his fist toward the sky. "World exalt. Who is he to make even you dare not act against him?" A long time passed before a voice came from above. "Wu and I, one who defied destiny with the martial Tao." The old man's figure stiffened when he heard this. Wu and I. That was a legendary figure. A long time passed before the old man shook his head and sighed. He felt that they were very lucky that it came to such an end, because while Wu and I was dead, he wasn't someone the Azura Hall could offend. As for the sprite progenitor, the old man had given up those thoughts. The sprite progenitor was great, but it wasn't something he could covet. But he knew the other experts hiding in the shadows desired it. After all, Wu and I was still dead. The southern desolate lands, at the top of the cliff and within the primordial pagoda. On the ascension platform, Nanjing sat cross-legged there while Xianxia, Sword Scroll, Arya, and Snowy were in front of her. Arya licked her Tonghulu while frequently sizing up Nanjing. Snowy blinked as she gazed at Nanjing, and then gazed at Arya and waved her paws lightly. Snowy was telling her that this big sister should not be offended, and that she was very strong. Very strong. Snowy was very respectful to Nanjing, because she never gave Snowy any face. No, it should be said that Nanjing was the type of decisive and direct person. And Snowy had her but smacked by Nanjing on many occasions. Arya nodded, and then she gazed at Nanjing with a gaze filled with curiosity. A long time passed before Nanjing suddenly opened her eyes, and then Snowy hurriedly flew over to her and waved her little paw. Two black spears immediately appeared before Nanjing. They were the spears that Xianxia had obtained in the primal battlefield. And Nanjing glanced at Snowy, touched the spears and said, "Not bad." Snowy cracked a smile, and then she raised the spears in Nanjing's direction. She was saying that the spears were for Nanjing. And Nanjing rubbed Snowy's head while a gentle expression appeared in her eyes. She really loved the little fellow, but she wasn't good at displaying it. Snowy cracked a smile and rubbed her head lightly against Nanjing's hand. Meanwhile, Nanjing stood up and looked Xianxia in the eyes. "Let's fight." Yang Yi was slightly stunned, and then he nodded. All right, fight, fight. As soon as he answered her, Snowy hurriedly left the ascension platform. Her eyes were filled with excitement. Yang Yi and a Nanjing were going to fight. She really looked forward to it. As far as Snowy was concerned, both Yang Yi and a Nanjing were extremely powerful. So, a fight between them would definitely be really fun. As for danger, she didn't worry about that at all, because she knew that Yang Yi wouldn't harm a Nanjing, and a Nanjing wouldn't harm Yang Yi either. Only Yang Yi and a Nanjing remained on the ascension platform. They exchanged glances, and then a Nanjing lightly twisted the tip of her foot against the ground. Hiss! A ray of black light flashed above the ascension platform. A fist shot straight at Yang Ye's face. It was a simple punch, just a very simple punch. But it was exactly such a simple punch that made Yang Yi react like he was facing a formidable enemy. Yang Yi didn't use his sword and swung a punch as well. His punch tore through everything before him. Bang! As soon as they came into contact, Yang Ye's expression changed drastically, and then he was pushed backward repeatedly. Right when he was about to be pushed out of the ascension platform, Yang Yi stopped. However, a Nanjing appeared in front of him at the same time. A Nanjing slammed a kick at Yang Yi from midair. The imposing aura it carried seemed like it could shatter the earth. Imposing aura. The imposing aura it carried was so strong that it shocked Yang Yi. He didn't dare act carelessly and drew his sword. A sword howl resounded, and a sword pressed against the bottom of a Nanjing's foot. It had forcefully stopped her imposing aura. A Nanjing twisted her right leg lightly. Bang! The entire ascension platform below Yang Yi shook violently while a strand of powerful energy rippled out above it. Along with the ripple of energy, the space here shook violently and seemed like it would explode apart at any moment. Yang Ye's sword started to bend. The powerful force contained within a Nanjing's right foot was even almost beyond the limits of the sword precursor, which was a divine treasure now. Suddenly, the sword gourd on Yang Ye's waist shook violently, and then a ray of light flashed. Right when it flashed, a Nanjing appeared around 10 m away from Yang Yi. The sword missed. That attack, which was capable of instantly killing a two-world realm expert, had missed just like that. She glanced at the sword gourd and said, "Not bad." She tapped the tip of her right foot down once she finished speaking. Hiss! A Nanjing instantly appeared before Yang Yi. At the same time, she raised her leg and swung it at Yang Ye's chest. It was fast, precise, and ruthless. She hadn't hesitated at all. That was what Yang Yi felt from her. Her attacks and moves were very simple, and they were devoid of any hesitation. That was the most terrifying form of attack. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly. He took a small step back with his right foot, and then he swung his sword. Hiss! Space was instantly sliced apart in its wake. Bang! An explosion resounded, and then both of them separated. Boom! The entire ascension platform shook violently. On the platform, Yang Yi and a Nanjing exchanged glances, and then she suddenly made a grabbing motion. Hiss! She'd grabbed Yang Ye's sword in her grasp. A flying sword. At that instant earlier, Yang Yi had launched another fling sword, but she'd been able to stop it with ease. She was strong. The sword in her grasp trembled violently. Suddenly, a Nanjing's hand slid down and grabbed the sword's hilt, and then she hurled it at Yang Yi. Hiss! A ray of light stabbed straight at Yang Yi. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly. He stretched out his right hand and grabbed, immediately grabbing the sword in his grasp. However, a Nanjing suddenly appeared before him, and then a fist slammed at his head. A Nanjing's fist. A sword stopped a Nanjing's fist when it was just a few inches away from Yang Ye's head. A Nanjing's strength was formidable, but Yang Ye's wasn't weak either. A sword and a fist. A moment of silence ensued, and then she suddenly closed her eyes. A moment later, she twisted her right hand. Bang! Yang Yi was blasted away all the way out of the platform. However, it only took a moment for a sword to descend from above a Nanjing. 3 overlapped swings with the sword domain. Bang! As soon as they descended, a Nanjing was instantly blasted away. outside the ascension platform, and Nanjing glanced at her fist, and there was a blood-red injury there. She glanced at Yang Yi and said, "That attack wasn't bad. Come, try mine." As soon as she finished speaking, a spear appeared in her grasp. It was one of the 2 spears Snowy had given her. And Nanjing held it tight, and then she tapped her right foot down. The tip of a spear instantly appeared before Yang Yi. Yang Ye's reaction was extremely fast, and his sword slashed down at the instant she attacked. Clang! An ear-piercing and sharp sound of collision resounded, and then they split apart. Outside the platform, Yang Yi and Nanjing exchanged glances and didn't attack again, because if they did, it would be a battle of life and death. Both of them would never choose to fight each other to the death. She glanced at Yang Yi. "You've grown strong." Yang Yi smiled. "You too." And Nanjing nodded slightly, and then she gazed at Snowy. The latter cracked a smile and waved her paw lightly. Spirit energy instantly surged into Nanjing. And Nanjing grinned, and then she walked over to Snowy and rubbed the little fellow's head. After that, she gazed at Yang Yi. "Let's go outside." Yang Yi nodded and left the primordial pagoda with Nanjing and Snowy. Wu and I was looking at the go board in deep thought. And Nanjing walked over to him and bowed slightly. Wu and I spoke softly. "You're leaving?" And Nanjing nodded. Wu and I put down the go piece in his grasp and said, "What do you think about your trip to the hell world?" She fell silent for a long time and said, "Brutal strong." Wu and I grinned. "Brutal? Little girl, that isn't the most brutal place yet, and it isn't the strongest either." She gazed at Wu and I and waited for him to continue. Wu and I smiled. "I've gone further than you, and I've seen more people and experienced more things. What you think is brutal and strong now isn't truly brutal or strong. The path of cultivation is without end." She nodded slightly. "I know." Wu and I smiled. "That martial qilin is yours. You'll be able to truly bring forth the might of those moves with its help." And Nanjing bowed slightly to Wu and I and gazed at Yang Yi. Yang Yi glanced at Wu and I. "Farewell." Wu and I nodded. "Go on." Yang Yi took Nanjing's hand, and then he transformed into a ray of light that vanished into the sky. Once they left, an old man appeared out of thin air before Wu and I. It was Martial Ancestor. Martial Ancestor glanced at the sky. "You're not going with them?" Wu and I shook his head. "The truly strong don't get there by being protected," Martial Ancestor said. "She has great potential. I hope she will be able to create her own path in the martial Tao and not take our path. After all, the facts prove that we were wrong." "Of course." Wu and I looked up at the sky. "The thing I admire the most about her is that she persists on her own martial Tao, and she merely learns from ours. That's the most precious part. She will go further than both of us." Martial Ancestor nodded, and then he seemed to have thought of something and asked, "What about that kid?" Wu and I fell silent. Martial Ancestor smiled. "What is it?" Wu and I shook his head slightly. "That kid has balls. He's a true man and I like him. However, he's too headstrong. He would rather break than bend, so he may go all the way or he may die soon. Who knows?" Martial Ancestor smiled. "You like him? That's rare." Wu and I glanced into the sky, and a vicious glow gradually appeared in his eyes. "I wasn't able to overcome you all those years ago. That's fine. My disciple definitely will. I can't rest in peace until you die." As soon as he finished speaking, both Wu and I and Martial Ancestor's figures gradually turned ethereal. It didn't take long for just a go board to remain on the cliff. Divine Martial City. Cloud Residence. As soon as they arrived there, the woman, Aleng, walked out of the bamboo house. Aleng glanced at Yang Yi, and then her gaze descended onto Nanjing. She sized up Nanjing for a moment, and then she nodded slightly. "The martial god physique. Amazing." And Nanjing glanced at Aleng and nodded slightly. "It's just ordinary." Aleng grinned and gazed at Yang Yi. She smiled. "Young Master Yang, I'll be troubling you again." Yang Yi smiled. "Of course." She smiled and sat down at the side. Yang Yi sat in front of her, and then she stretched out her hand. Xianxia's hand hovered above hers as his primordial violet energy surged incessantly into her. Aling gradually closed her eyes, and her pale countenance slowly turned rosier and rosier. Primordial violet energy. Aling spoke softly, as expected of an energy renowned for healing. My trip here was worth it. Xiangyi glanced at her and remained silent. A long time passed before Xiangyi withdrew his hand. However, she suddenly grabbed his hand and grinned at Xiangyi. Young Master Yang, are you willing to sell it? Sell it? Xiangyi shook his head. No. She grinned. But I really like it. If you're willing to sell it to me, feel free to ask for divine treasures or anything else. Xiangyi shook his head again. It's not for sale. Aling's eyes narrowed slightly. In an instant, the atmosphere here became tense. And Nanjing glanced at Aling and slowly clenched her fists. Xiangyi grinned. Miss Aling, you're not planning on getting it by force, right? She pulled her hand away, glanced at her palm and spoke softly. To be honest, I did have such a thought. You may not be aware of it, but this sickness of mine is impossible to cure even with primordial violet energy. Primordial violet energy is only able to slow down its progress. She glanced at him and continued. But if I have primordial violet energy with me, I'll have much, much more time. In that way, I'll have time to look for another way. Xiangyi smiled. So you plan to use force, right? She gazed at him for a long time and cracked a smile. Young Master Yang, are we friends? Xiangyi shook his head. Friends? They couldn't be considered as friends. Aling chuckled, and then she suddenly started coughing. Took her a while to stop coughing. She smiled. Young Master Yang, I really admire your character. She stood up slowly as she spoke and looked up at the sky. Young Master Yang, I have a small warning for you before you leave. I wonder if you're willing to hear it. Xiangyi nodded. Go on. She suddenly looked down at Snowy, who was on Xiangyi's shoulder. Snowy seemed to have sensed something and gazed at Aling. Snowy blinked to display she was wondering what Aling wanted. Aling gazed at Snowy for a long time and said, The sprite progenitor, young Master Yang, if she stays with you, then I can honestly tell you that both you and her won't have a happy ending. She can't be considered a sprite progenitor yet, but she will definitely become one. That's why many powers, the very, very ancient type of powers, will absolutely not let her escape their grasps. She looked toward the north and continued. There's also the Eternal River and Eternal Kingdom which lies beyond it. Do you know that countless powers in Eternal Kingdom are waiting for a new sprite progenitor to be born? Xiangyi frowned and was slightly bewildered. They are waiting for a new sprite progenitor to be born? Aling nodded. If it hadn't been for the sprite progenitor, Eternal Kingdom would have been destroyed during that war. But the desolate race wasn't annihilated during that war. So Eternal Kingdom is afraid that they'll return. Thus, they need the sprite progenitor. They would have a much, much greater chance at winning if they had the sprite progenitor on their side. She gazed at Xiangyi at this point. As for the desolate, if they find out that you have a sprite progenitor, what do you think they would do? They would stop at nothing to seize it or kill it. What they cannot obtain must be killed. Other powers wouldn't dare to kill the sprite progenitor, but the desolate race would. The desolate race? Suddenly, a Nanjing asked, Are they very strong? Aling glanced at a Nanjing and smiled. Very. A Nanjing shook his head slightly and gazed at Snowy. Don't be afraid. Him and I will protect you. Snowy cracked a smile, flew over to a Nanjing's shoulder, and then rubbed her head against a Nanjing's face. Snowy was naturally not afraid. Who had he ever feared? She had so many divine treasures, lackeys, and both Xiangyi and a Nanjing. Most importantly, she had Xianxia. Xianxia had promised to protect her, and Xianxia was very, very strong. In short, Snowy felt that she was very, very safe. Meanwhile, Aling walked over to a Nanjing, glanced at the latter and said, Missin, why allow yourself to be swept into all of this? Your future is absolutely promising with what you have. And Nanjing looked Aling in the eyes. Because I like it. Aling gazed at Nanjing for a long time before she shook her head and smiled. Do as you wish. She gazed at Yang Yi. Young Master Yang. I hope we'll meet again. Good luck. Yang Yi didn't say anything and just left with Snowy and Nanjing. Once they left, Aling suddenly spoke softly. The martial god physique. She. Suddenly, Left Sword seemed hesitant to speak. Young miss? Aling asked. What is it? She hesitated for quite some time before she said. Are young Master Yang and Missin really strong? Aling nodded. Very strong. If I'm not wrong, that young Master Yang is intentionally suppressing his cultivation. The longer he does that, the more terrifying it would be when it finally erupts. Not to mention the future, even now, ordinary three-world realm experts can't harm him. As for Miss Sin, Aling's eyes narrowed slightly. The martial god physique. Her physique is one of the 10 great physiques just like mine. So, what do you think? Left Sword seemed quite hesitant, like she had more to say. Aling frowned slightly. What is it? Left Sword lowered her head slightly and said, Young miss. Right Sword told the eldest young master about the primordial violet energy. And they said that if you don't use force to get it, they will once young Master Yang and miss and leave. How dare she? Aling suddenly shouted with fury. Left Sword's face turned pale, and she immediately fell to her knees. Aling glanced at Left Sword and looked up at the sky. I hope we get there in time. Senior Heaven and Senior Earth. Come with me. Her figure vanished on the spot. Once they left Divine Martial City, it didn't take long for Yang Yi and Nanjing to stop abruptly. A young man was standing not too far ahead of them, and there was also a woman and a robust man. Yang Yi recognized the woman and the robust man because they were Right Sword and the three-world realm expert, Ada. Yang Yi gazed at the young man, and the latter spoke indifferently. I want the primordial violet energy you have, so please give it to me. Yang Yi asked. Is this Aling's doing? The man looked Yang Yi in the eyes. You don't have much time. 3 breaths of time. If you don't hand it over in 3 breaths of time, then you can leave your lives behind. Suddenly, Yang Ye's figure appeared above the young man, and a ray of sword energy slashed down from above him. 3 swings with the sword domain. The young man's expression changed drastically, but his reaction was absolutely swift. He'd formed a seal with both hands at the instant Yang Ye's sword descended, and then a powerful yellow ray of light surged out of him. Bang! An explosion resounded. The yellow light exploded apart immediately, and the young man was blasted over 1 kilometer away. As soon as he stopped himself, his pupils constricted while he instinctively dodged to the side. Hiss! While he'd moved away, his right hand had been chopped off by a flying sword. Right Sword's face turned pale from the sight of this. The robust man was about to attack when a spear tore through the air. A vicious glow flashed through his eyes as he swung his right hand forward. In an instant, a thick and long iron chain slammed against the spear. Bang! The world shook violently. Suddenly, Nanjing appeared before him, and then she whipped her leg at him. The robust man didn't dodge and slammed his palm at her kick instead. A head-on collision. Boom! An explosion resounded, and then the robust man was slammed over 300 m away. A moment later, a spear instantly arrived before him. The robust man shouted with fury and slammed his fist forward. Bang! He was blasted away once more. Meanwhile, Nanjing soundlessly appeared before him. Suppression. As soon as they fought, the three-world realm expert was suppressed by Nanjing. Meanwhile, after he sliced off the young man's arm, Yang Yi didn't stop. His figure transformed into a ray of light that shot at the young man. The young man was horrified and hurriedly withdrew a green shield. However, it shattered as soon as it came into contact with Yang Ye's sword. A moment later, the sword descended and pressed against his forehead. The sword didn't stop and was about to pierce into the young man's forehead when a voice resounded, Brother Yang, please show mercy. The sword stopped. Yang Yi turned around, and he saw a woman walking over slowly. It was Aling, and an old man and an old woman were behind her. Aling walked swiftly over to Yang Yi, glanced at the young man, and then cupped her fist at Yang Yi. Brother Yang, I'm sorry about this. Yang Yi ignored Aling and looked to the side. And Nanjing and the robust man were still fighting, but at this moment he was being completely suppressed and was without the ability to fight back. His defeat was just a matter of time. Yang Yi withdrew his gaze and looked at Aling. Miss Aling, I need an explanation. She laughed bitterly. I'm sorry. They came here because of me. So allow me to apologize. I hope you'll give me face and let them go. Yang Yi gazed at her for a long time and was about to lower his sword. However, the young man suddenly spoke angrily. Aling, who does he think he is? What right does he have to make you speak like that? He gazed at Yang Yi and continued. I'm telling you, we're taking the primordial violet energy. If you refuse to hand it over, then you and everyone close to you will die a graveless death. You, hiss. The young man's voice stopped abruptly. A sword had pierced his forehead. Aling's eyes narrowed slightly while the atmosphere instantly became tense. Yang Yi sheathed his sword. Yang Yi gazed at Aling and grinned. Sorry, Miss Aling. I won't be giving you face today. Do you have a problem with that? Aling gazed at Yang Yi in silence while the divine sense of both the old man and old woman behind her had locked onto Yang Yi. The atmosphere here was extremely tense. As for Yang Yi, he ignored all three of them and gazed at a Nanjing. Bang! A muffled explosion resounded, and the robust man was blasted away. And Nanjing wanted to follow up with another attack, but Yang Yi suddenly said, Let's go! And Nanjing stopped, walked over to Yang Yi, and then glanced at Aling. But it didn't take long for her gaze to descend onto the two behind Aling. It was because their divine senses were locked onto Yang Yi. And Nanjing clenched her fists. Wanna fight? Yang Yi was stunned speechless. The old man glanced at her and said, Any time. And Nanjing gazed at Aling. The latter grinned. Then both of you can spar. Right, it's a spar, so spar seriously. Otherwise, it would be meaningless, right? She gazed at Yang Yi while she spoke. Spar seriously. How could Yang Yi not understand what she meant? He smiled and gazed at a Nanjing. Fight seriously. And Nanjing replied, Then I'll kill him. She walked over once she finished speaking. Yang Ye's face darkened. Even if you want to do that, just keep it in your heart and don't speak it out loud. She was too direct. Aling chuckled. Brother Yang, this senior of mine is at the peak of the three-world realm. He rarely loses against others in the same realm of cultivation. Yang Yi smiled. It's fine. Besides me, she's never lost to anyone else in the same realm of cultivation. Aling glanced at Yang Yi and smiled. Then let's wait and see. Yang Yi nodded. All right, we shall. Meanwhile, a Nanjing waved her right hand, and a black spear appeared in her grasp. A spear. And Nanjing held it tightly, and then she vanished on the spot. Hiss! The sound of space being torn apart resounded. A huge gap in space opened up in the sky. The old man closed his eyes slowly. Suddenly, he twisted his right hand, and then an ethereal saber appeared in his grasp. A moment later, he grabbed it with both hands and swung it forward. Clang! Saber and spear collided, and the world around them shook. And Nanjing and the old man were pushed back. But it didn't take long for them to simultaneously stop themselves. And Nanjing tightened her grip on the spear while she closed her eyes slowly. Bang! A wave of invisible energy swept out from within her. Aura. An imposing aura. And Nanjing's aura was growing stronger and stronger, and the world gradually started to tremble around her. Aling's eyes narrowed slightly while a wisp of solemnness appeared deep within them. An imposing aura. And Nanjing's imposing aura could suppress the aura of the world around her. Moreover, the most terrifying part was that it was still growing. It was growing madly. Pressure. Everyone gradually sensed a wave of formidable pressure. Even Yang Yi sensed it. It pressed upon his heart, causing him to feel quite suffocated. At this moment, Yang Ye's expression became solemn too. Even his heart palpitated slightly before her imposing aura. Most importantly, it was still rising madly and showed no sign of stopping. So how strong was it? The old man's face was unprecedentedly solemn as well. What was most important in a battle between two armies? Aura. At this moment, and Nanjing's aura had completely suppressed his own. A formidable enemy. At this moment, the old man stopped looking down on Nanjing and closed his eyes slowly as he tightened his grip on the saber. The profound energy within him surged madly into the saber, and the space around him slowly started to become distorted because of that. Suddenly, Nanjing opened her eyes. "Take this!" As soon as she finished speaking, she hurled the spear at the old man. The spear shot through space. In an instant, Yang Yi and Aling's expressions turned extremely solemn. The strength carried by the spear entirely exceeded their expectations. As far as Yang Yi was concerned, only 4 swings of the sword domain could stop this attack of hers. Moreover, it was only a possibility. He wasn't confident in being able to stop it. And Nanjing was that strong. The old man's face was covered in a ferocious expression. At this moment, he had no way to back down, and he had to face Nanjing's attack no matter what. "Ha!" The old man shouted with fury, and then he swung the saber with both hands. The world around him shuddered and cracked open. The spear arrived. Boom! The saber exploded apart, and then the spear stabbed into the old man's left chest. Hiss! The old man was blasted far away with the spear still in his chest. Blood sprayed. The surroundings fell silent. She defeated him with a single attack. And Nanjing glanced at the old man. "Do you want to continue?" "Continue?" Her voice was very calm, but it carried a strand of invisible confidence and overbearingness. The old man glanced at his chest. There was a bloody hole there, and it wouldn't heal no matter how he tried. The old man looked up at Nanjing and was about to speak when Aling suddenly said, "We admit defeat this time." The old man gazed at Aling and lowered his head slightly. "Forgive me for bringing shame to you, young miss." Aling smiled. "It's normal. Senior Sky. She possesses the martial god physique. She's the future martial god. The martial god physique." The old man's pupils constricted, and then he gazed at Nanjing with astonishment. He naturally understood what the martial god physique represented. It was extremely terrifying even in the eternal dimension. The martial god. And Nanjing ignored the old man and walked over to Yang Yi. She glanced at Aling and said, "Shall we continue?" "Continue?" Aling grinned. "There'll be a chance for that in the future." And Nanjing nodded. "All right." She moved over to Yang Yi's side. Yang Yi glanced at Aling. "Miss Aling, farewell." He left Nanjing away and vanished into the sky. Aling's face gradually calmed down on the spot. Meanwhile, Right Sword went over to Aling with her head lowered, and she spoke softly. "Young miss?" Aling gazed at Right Sword. "I've been too good to all of you, and that made you forget your place and dare to arbitrarily decide on things." Right Sword knelt down and spoke in a trembling voice. "Young miss, I was wrong. I'm sorry." "You were wrong." Aling walked over to Right Sword and looked down at her. "You think I don't want that primordial violet energy? I want it, but you should see who you're dealing with. A genius in the sword Dao, a genius in the martial Dao, and a sprite progenitor. Can primordial violet energy even be compared with them?" She bent down slightly. "I plan to become friends with him, and I did make some progress with him. Yet now it's all gone because of you. Not only is it all gone, we almost became sworn enemies. It's all because of you." Right Sword spoke in a trembling voice. "Young miss, I was wrong. I am sorry." Aling shook her head. "That little fellow was a sprite progenitor. If we became friends with Yang Yi and Nanjing, it would be equivalent to becoming friends with a sprite progenitor. Do you know what that represents? Do you? You don't." Aling shook her head. "You can leave." Right Sword's face turned ghastly pale. She grabbed Aling's feet and said, "Young miss, I really realize my mistakes. So please don't make me go. Don't make me leave. I'm begging you." Left Sword was about to say something, but Aling shook her head and vanished into the distance. Left Sword sighed softly. She knew her young miss had made up her mind, and Aling's decision was impossible to change once she'd made up her mind. Left Sword walked over to Right Sword and spoke softly. "Just head back for now. I'll help you talk to her once she cools down. Right sword sat weakly on the ground with despair on her face. Meanwhile, Aling suddenly stopped in midair, and a black-clothed man appeared before her. The man took a knee and said, "Young miss, the Patriarch has ordered your immediate return." Aling spoke indifferently. "For what?" The black-clothed man shook his head. "I don't know." Aling looked the man in the eyes, causing cold sweat to drip down his head. A short while passed before the black-clothed man hesitated for a moment and said, "It should be your marriage agreement?" "My marriage agreement?" A wisp of disdain curled up the corners of her mouth. "What nonsense!" The black-clothed man was stunned, and then he was delighted. "Young miss, your injuries." She closed her eyes slowly. "I've been wandering the world for so long. It's time to head home." The black-clothed man hesitated for a moment and said, "You seem to have encountered some trouble. Do you want me to resolve it for you?" Aling shook her head. "You can't resolve this problem of mine. All right, forget that. Let's go. There's one more thing." Meanwhile, the black-clothed man continued. "The Patriarch received word that the sprite progenitor has appeared." "Young miss?" Aling interrupted him and said, "I'll head home and talk to him about that myself. Let's go." She vanished on the spot once she finished speaking. At a spot in the clouds, Xianxia withdrew the myriad world diagram. He unfurled it and gazed at a Nanjing with a smile on his face. "Do you know what awaits us when we head back this time?" And Nanjing glanced at Xianxia, and then she stomped her foot down with her spear in hand. Boom! Space shook violently. She closed her eyes slowly and said, "I'll kill with you. I'll kill with you all the way. Kill. Kill all the way." Xianxia roared with laughter, and then he took her hand and tapped the myriad world diagram. Swish! 2 rays of blue light instantly enveloped them, and they vanished on the spot. The myriad world diagram could teleport them almost anywhere. Eternal Border. Presently, a storm was brewing in Eternal Border. Countless experts had returned from the Eternal River, causing the originally calm atmosphere of Eternal Border to become tense. The ancestors of the 6 clans, the ancestors of the 4 powers in the Eternal River, the founding ancestor of the Immortal estate, and countless other experts had converged here. All of them had a single objective: Xianxia, or to be more precise, the sprite progenitor. The sprite progenitor which could take them into Eternal Kingdom. So long as they obtained it, they would be able to negotiate with Eternal Kingdom. No matter what they asked for, Eternal Kingdom would accept it for the sake of the sprite progenitor. Anything could be discussed when it involved a sprite progenitor. World Mountain. On the teleportation platform, a teleportation formation suddenly trembled, and then a young man in a gray robe appeared there. The young man walked out of the formation, and then the formation behind him trembled once more before an old man walked out from within it. The old man walked over to stand silently behind the young man. The young man glanced at the surroundings and smiled. "This is Eternal Border? Elder Song. Tell me about this place." The old man spoke softly. "Eternal Border has existed for almost 1,000,000 years, and it has gone through 4 eras. The Ancient Era, the Elemental Era, the Primal Era, and the Current Era. The Ancient Era was too long ago, so its history is unknown. Besides that, the most dazzling era was the Primal Era. During that era, there were countless experts and geniuses here." The young man smiled. "Unfortunately, that era fell at the hands of our race." There was a wisp of pride on the corner of the old man's mouth. "If it wasn't for that sprite progenitor, we would have annihilated Eternal Kingdom. Unfortunate. Truly unfortunate. The sprite progenitor." The young man's eyes narrowed slightly. "Elder Song, did our race really lose because of the sprite progenitor?" The old man sighed softly. "The sprite progenitor's strength isn't terrifying. Even 10 sprite progenitors would be no match for our patriarch. The true reason for her being terrifying was her ability to summon and converge others. It was too great." The young man asked, "What do you mean?" The old man sighed again. There were some races who were staying out of the war, and the sprites as well. Even Eternal Border had remained neutral. However, once she joined the battle, all of them took Eternal Kingdom's side, and countless living beings and sprites from countless universes kept coming to provide support. He shook his head and continued. Our race didn't have the slightest advantage in any aspect anymore, especially with the network of relationships that the sprite progenitor possessed. Once she joined the battle, countless seniors who were just watching the battle indifferently joined in. If our patriarch had continued to fight that war, the final outcome would be that besides our patriarch, everyone in our entire race would perish during that war. So, the patriarch had no choice but to retreat. The young man fell silent for a long time and asked, "Who gave the order to slaughter all the living beings and sprites during the war?" The old man laughed bitterly. The patriarch's younger brother. After that battle, the patriarch personally imprisoned him in a small world. But he should be coming out soon. The young man gazed at the old man. Won't he hate the patriarch? The old man shook his head. He wouldn't dare. The patriarch's strength will make him dare not arouse even the slightest thought of that. The patriarch. A wisp of solemnness appeared in the young man's eyes, or it should be described as fear and reverence. It was a person who everyone revered and feared. Meanwhile, Elder Tsang said, "Seventh Prince, when the patriarch asked you and your siblings to search for the sprite progenitor, it's actually a test. The one who gets the sprite progenitor will be our crown prince." The crown prince. A wisp of excitement flashed through his eyes. It was a position only inferior to the patriarch, and it came with very, very great authority. Moreover, it allowed one to enjoy countless resources of their race. It could be said that so long as he became the crown prince, he would gain both the greatest authority and resources in an instant, especially the authority. In his race, their elusive patriarch rarely managed their race. In other words, the crown prince was equivalent to the one who managed the entire race. The sprite progenitor. However, the only way to become the crown prince was to obtain the sprite progenitor. The young man restrained his thoughts and looked up at the sky. The sprite progenitor belongs to me, Huang Yan. The old man and him vanished from the teleportation platform. Once they left, an old man appeared here, and he looked up at the sky and shook his head as he sighed. Eternal border isn't going to stay peaceful for long. White Emperor City. 2 rays of light descended from the sky and entered White Emperor City. They dispersed before the main hall in the city, and then Yang Yi and Bai Jixin appeared there. And Nanjing sat on the city walls while leaning against her spear. She had her eyes closed and seemed to be cultivating. Meanwhile, Snowy was on her shoulder. Snowy kept looking around, and no one knew what she was thinking. At the entrance to the hall, the city governor appeared before them, and he spoke solemnly when he saw Yang Yi and Bai Jixin. "Why are you back?" Bai Jixin smiled bitterly. "Father, if we didn't come back, White Emperor City would probably vanish from this world, right?" The city governor fell silent. Yang Yi glanced at the surroundings, and there were no less than 10 concealed auras there. Every single one of them was at the Limitbreaker realm at least. Obviously, White Emperor City had been surrounded a long time ago. If Yang Yi didn't return, they would attack White Emperor City to force Yang Yi to return. The city governor laughed bitterly. How could he not be aware of White Emperor City's current situation? Even then, he still didn't hope for them to return. There was no hope. He couldn't see any hope. There were so many powers and experts who wanted Yang Ye's life. Yang Yi smiled and said, "You two chat." He turned around and left once he finished speaking. He went to the city walls and glanced at a Nanjing. "How many are there?" 12. She continued. "But they've left. They left." Obviously, they knew of Yang Yi and a Nanjing's strength, so they were afraid that Yang Yi and a Nanjing would attack them. After all, the death of a single Limitbreaker realm expert was a huge loss to them. And Nanjing suddenly asked, "What's your plan?" "My plan?" Yang Yi was stunned, and then he glanced into the sky. Actually, he had no plan. He just wanted the people around him to be safe. Of course, there was one other thing. He was waiting for Snowy to fully transform into a sprite progenitor. Snowy still needed his protection right now, and he would absolutely not let her fall into their hands and become their puppet. If anyone tried to touch Snowy, he would fight them to the death. Suddenly, a Nanjing looked to the side, and a middle-aged man was approaching White Emperor City. The middle-aged man was robust and bearded, and he had a huge saber on his back. The saber was very wide, even wider than his body. Every single step he took made the ground tremble violently. Besides that, there was an imposing aura on him, an overbearing aura. As the middle-aged man approached the city, the aura he emanated grew stronger and stronger. When he arrived before the city entrance, a monstrous wave of pressure enveloped the entire city. Everyone in White Emperor City was horrified. A three-world realm expert. Moreover, he was a saber cultivator. Xianxia was about to speak when a Nanjing suddenly leaped off the city wall and appeared before him. The middle-aged man glanced at her and said, "Fuck off! I don't hit women." A Nanjing didn't say a word and just tapped the tip of her foot down. Hiss! An afterimage flashed. The middle-aged man frowned slightly when a Nanjing vanished, and then he clenched his right fist and slammed it forward. Bang! An explosion resounded, and he was pushed back repeatedly. He only managed to stop himself around 300 m away, and as soon as he did that, a wave of powerful pressure arrived before him. A spear. At this moment, the middle-aged man didn't dare act carelessly. He drew his saber with both hands and swung it. Skybreaker! Along with his furious shout, the sky shook violently, and it seemed like a pair of scissors had cut it open. Meanwhile, the spear arrived. Bang! As soon as they collided, the sky trembled violently, and then the middle-aged man was blasted over 1 kilometer back with this saber. Once he stopped himself, the ground beneath his feet immediately collapsed. At the same time, blood covered his arms because a Nanjing's attack had cracked both of them open. The middle-aged man had a solemn expression on his face. Suddenly, a Nanjing stomped her right foot down, and then she appeared in front of him. After that, she slammed the black spear down with both hands. The middle-aged man's pupils constricted slightly. He didn't dare act carelessly against this attack and flicked his saber upward with both hands. Hiss! Everywhere it passed, space was instantly sliced open. Bang! Spear and saber collided. The middle-aged man was immediately blasted backward again. And Nanjing was about to follow up with another attack when a ray of sword energy flashed. The hairs on the middle-aged man's body instantly stood on end, and he instinctively dodged to the right. Hiss! The middle-aged man appeared 300 m to the right, but one of his arms was still there where he'd been just a moment ago. However, that wasn't the end of it. At the instant his figure appeared to the right, another ray of sword energy had flashed. An instant later, the man's eyes opened wide. So fast. As soon as he finished speaking, his head tilted to the side and fell off his neck. Blood sprayed out like a fountain. Favorite, a flying sword. Along with 2 rays of light, 2 swords floated calmly before Xianxia. It was the Sword Supreme and Sword Precursor. Xianxia issued a command in his heart and they returned to the sword gourd on his waist. Xianxia waved his right hand, and the middle-aged man's soul was immediately absorbed into his palm. Xianxia greedily absorbed all of it, and then he gazed at a Nanjing who was standing by his side now. "You're not angry, right?" She shook her head. "Who kills him doesn't make a difference." Xianxia smiled. "True." She glanced at Xianxia's palm. "Absorbing souls?" Xianxia nodded. "It's a secret technique." A Nanjing nodded slightly and glanced at the sky. "There are many more. Shall we kill them?" Xianxia smiled. "Let's wait for them to attack." And Nanjing nodded, and then she flashed onto the city wall. She stabbed her spear into the wall and sat cross-legged there while leaning against the spear with her eyes closed. Xianxia glanced at the sky while a smile curled up on his lips, and then he entered White Emperor City. Xianxia arrived in a room within the city, and then he sat down cross-legged and entered the primordial pagoda. Xianxia glanced at his palm, and there was a pitch-black vortex there. Souls. Since Xianxia had taught him the soul-devouring technique that day, he'd absorbed numerous souls, and they were quite useful to him. Xianxia clenched his right fist slowly. In an instant, the black vortex in his palm started to spin rapidly. Countless strands of energy gradually dispersed from his palm and converged into his body. He was planning on fully absorbing these souls. As he absorbed them, his aura grew stronger and stronger, but it didn't take long for the aura to be gradually suppressed. Suppression. He was suppressing it madly. Meanwhile, Nanjing suddenly looked up on the walls of White Emperor City. A ray of light was descending from afar like a meteor. Behind the ray of light was a wave of flames. A wave of powerful aura instantly descended upon White Emperor City. If the ray of light was allowed to enter the city would be transformed into ruins in an instant. And Nanjing suddenly stood up, and then she kicked the spear before her. Bang! The spear tore through the air and slammed against the ray of light. Bang! The sky exploded apart and sparks sprayed. Suddenly, an ethereal and towering palm descended from above, and it enveloped the entire city within it. And Nanjing stretched out her right hand, and a spear appeared in her grasp. An instant later, she hurled up into the sky. Hiss! The spear tore through the air and stabbed the palm. Hiss! The spear pierced through the center of the palm, and then a wave of powerful energy rippled out of it. In an instant, the palm was turned to ash. An old man stood high above in the clouds. He looked down at White Emperor City, or to be more precise, he gazed at Nanjing for a while. Suddenly, he clenched his right hand in her direction, and the space around her instantly started burning. At the same time, a wave of powerful pressure locked down the space around her. And Nanjing's face remained indifferent as she raised her fist and slammed it forward. Boom! It blasted through the air. The pressure that enveloped her was instantly blasted into bits, and the flames around her vanished without a trace as well. Meanwhile, Nanjing tapped her right foot down. Bang! An instant later, an explosion rumbled in the clouds. The old man appeared 3 kilometers away, and Nanjing was standing where he'd been a moment ago. And Nanjing waved her hands, and then 2 spears appeared within her grasps. A moment later, she hurled both of them at the old man. Hiss! Hiss! They tore through the sky and forcefully tore open 2 pitch-black rifts in space. The old man's pupils constricted abruptly, and then he stretched out his right hand and shook it lightly. In an instant, a huge barrier of light appeared before him, and it was like a door that split the world into 2. Countless strands of profound energy surged within his palm before converging into the barrier of light. Meanwhile, the 2 spears arrived. Bang! Bang! The barrier of light shook violently, and then countless cracks appeared on it. Meanwhile, Nanjing suddenly appeared behind the spears, grabbed them, and twisted them with force. Boom! The barrier of light instantly collapsed, and the spears shot through. Bang! Bang! Along with 2 explosions in the sky, the old man was blasted over 10 kilometers away. And Nanjing was about to attack when the old man turned around and vanished into the sky. He'd fled, and Nanjing frowned slightly. Meanwhile, 2 rays of light flashed through the distant sky. Flying swords. 2 flying swords vanished, and then a head crashed down from the sky. And Nanjing turned around on the city wall, and Bai Zhixian and Yang Yi were by her side. She glanced at Bai Zhixian, and then she gazed at Yang Yi. Let's go. Yang Yi nodded. Let's go to the sword ruins. As he spoke, Yang Yi flipped his palm and a sword sheath appeared there. I sense something over there that's summoning this sheath. And Nanjing gazed at the sheath, and it was trembling. She fell silent for a moment and asked, What about this place? Yang Yi smiled. I'm their target. So long as I'm back in Eternal Border, they won't target White Emperor City. And Nanjing nodded. All right. Yang Yi glanced at the surroundings and said, Let's go. They vanished from the city walls once he finished speaking. Once they left, the countless auras around the city vanished. At a certain point in space above the city, there were 5 people standing there. They were the ancestors of the 5 clans. The initial emperor glanced in the direction Yang Yi and Nanjing had left toward, and then he spoke indifferently. That woman is truly amazing. Beichuan Xiu smiled. It's the martial emperor physique. What did you expect? The martial god physique. All of the others had quite solemn expressions on their faces. Obviously, they'd heard of it. Beichuan Xiu smiled. I didn't expect Yang Yi to find such help. It's even more interesting now. Interesting. Ego suddenly spoke coldly. Our target is that sprite progenitor. Now, countless other people have arrived in eternal border, and some of them are even capable of making us unable to rest at ease upon obtaining the sprite progenitor. Xianxia smiled. Why should we go fight for it? Someone will be unable to restrain themselves, sooner or later, right? The initial emperor asked. So we strike last and take advantage of them? Xianxia nodded. The initial emperor shook his head. That's what everyone else is thinking. Xianxia looked down and said, I know. So, it now depends on who will be unable to restrain themselves first. Someone definitely will fail. Fuck off. Ego suddenly said, Haven't you noticed? Yang Yi is much stronger than he was, and if this continued, we won't be the one who takes from him, he will take from us. Yang Ye's strength was growing increasingly stronger, and it was something everyone realized. None of them didn't fear Yang Ye's speed of growth. They weren't the only ones. Even the others hiding in the shadows were extremely afraid, especially now that Yang Yi had the owner of the martial god physique, and Nanjing by his side. If Yang Yi was allowed to continue, no one dared to imagine the consequence of that. However, no one wanted to go first and allow others to take advantage of them. So, they were delaying. Xianxia closed his eyes slowly. Someone will definitely be unable to restrain themselves. So wait until someone goes first. All of them fell silent. While they knew others were of the same mind, they had no other choice and could only wait. They were all waiting until they reached a breaking point. On the other side of the sky, there was a woman looking down at the city below in silence. It was Nanli Meng. She looked up at the sky, and a long time passed before she shook her head, smiled, and vanished into the sky. The sword ruins. Yang Yi and Nanjing arrived at the sword ruins. He glanced at the surroundings, and then they vanished on the spot. At a mountaintop in the sword ruins, Yang Yi saw Jianyu. She was seated cross-legged on the ground with a huge sword in the ground by her side. Yang Yi and Nanjing walked over to Jianyu, and she spoke softly. It's about to emerge. It's about to emerge. Yang Yi spoke solemnly. That sword. She nodded. Are you here for it? Yang Yi was quite surprised. How did you know? She replied softly. The sheath in your grasp. Yang Yi glanced at the sheath and asked, You've seen it before? She nodded. I have. Yang Yi hesitated for a moment and said, Does the sword belong to your clan? She shook her head. My clan owes it. If it wasn't for it, my clan would have been annihilated during that calamity. She stood up slowly and continued, If it leaves, I'll be free. Yang Yi said, I may take it with me. She smiled. If it's mine, then it will be mine. But if it isn't mine, then it will never be mine. Yang Yi smiled. Thank you. She nodded slightly and waved her right hand. In an instant, a huge crack appeared before her, and it went deep into the ground with no end in sight. She said, Go on down. Yang Yi nodded and gazed at Nanjing. Be careful. He transformed into a ray of light and went underground. At the mountain peak, Jianyu turned around and looked up at the sky. It may not go very smoothly, and Nanjing looked up at the sky with a spear in her grasp. I'll kill all who come. She just stood there on the mountaintop like a god of war. Jianyu glanced at Nanjing while feeling quite shocked in her heart. Imposing aura. There was an indescribably imposing aura on Nanjing, and it felt confident, extremely confident. It was like she could even kill a god. A mysterious and amazing woman. That was what Jianyu thought of Nanjing. Jianyu restrained her thoughts and looked up into the sky. So long as Yang Yi could take the sword, then her mission would be over. Moreover, her clan wouldn't have to ever shoulder this responsibility anymore. Her responsibility was to protect the sword until it found its owner. In the past, she'd placed her hopes on Snowy because she felt that it was very likely for Snowy to take it with her. After all, Snowy was a sprite progenitor. Unfortunately, the sword hadn't shown itself because of Snowy. That disappointed her a little. Yet now it was actually on the verge of leaving on its own. That was something she had never expected. No matter what, she refused to let anyone spoil this. Because so long as the sword left the sword ruins, everything would stop being any of her business. Xianxia held her huge sword in her right grasp while looking up into the sky, and her gaze gradually turned icy cold. Xianxia descended all the way with Snowy on his shoulder. When he was going in search of treasures, he naturally had to take Snowy with him. Xianxia descended all the way for a period even he wasn't sure of, and then his feet finally touched the ground. Snowy scanned the surroundings with slight curiosity and anticipation. She had spoken with the sword in the past. At that time, she'd asked it to come out and play. Unfortunately, it seemed to be incapable of leaving. Now, it probably could. Xianxia led Snowy ahead, and it didn't take long for him to stop. There was a pitch-black casket not too far ahead. Snowy pointed at it. Xianxia smiled and walked over to it. It wasn't a huge casket, and it was covered in strange symbols. Besides that, there were hair-thin black threads around it. These threads enveloped the casket like a ball. The sword sheath in Xianxia's grasp was trembling. Suddenly, the casket trembled. At the same time, the symbols around it started to light up along with the shaking of the sword sheath. After that, a low sword house seeped out from within the casket. Snowy pointed at the casket again and gazed at Xianxia. Xianxia gazed at it for a long time, and then he raised his sword and swung it. Bang! Xianxia and his sword were blasted away, but the casket didn't even shake. Snowy blinked and was quite stunned. A short while later, she flew over to Xianxia with eyes filled with concern. Xianxia rubbed her head and smiled. "I'm fine." As he spoke, he looked at the casket. Its hardness had exceeded his imaginations. After all, his sword was a divine treasure, but it had actually been unable to leave a mark on the casket. Suddenly, Snowy flew over to the casket and slapped it. Bang! The casket shook violently, and then it trembled while seeming to be afraid of something. Snowy blinked and sniffed lightly. Hiss! The casket instantly turned ethereal, and it trembled even more violently. Right when Snowy was about to inhale again, the casket suddenly sent out ripples. Obviously, it was communicating with her. Snowy blinked and patted it lightly to say that it should open up. The casket hesitated for a moment, and Snowy immediately opened her mouth in response. Suddenly, it shook, and then opened slowly. A sword howl resounded, and it shot through the ground and into the clouds. At this moment, everyone throughout Eternal Border heard it. Countless experts looked toward the sword ruins, and it didn't take long for some of them to think of something. Their expressions changed drastically, and they rushed in the sword ruins direction. The sword ruins. Underground. At the instant the casket flipped open, a sword flew out from within, and then it transformed into a ray of light that entered Xianxia's forehead. In an instant, his body stiffened, and then the scene before him started to change. 3 breaths of time later, a black-robed sword cultivator appeared before him. The sword cultivator walked in Xianxia's direction and said, "If you wish to obtain this sword's acknowledgement, then you must pass 12 sword cultivators." As soon as the man finished speaking, a ray of sword energy shot at Xianxia's forehead. It was extremely swift to the point it exceeded Xianxia's reaction speed. Xianxia instinctively swung a punch forward. Hiss! A sword pierced through his arm, and Xianxia was blasted away with it. The sword ruins. Xianxu's face gradually turned gloomy at the top of the mountain. It was because countless auras had appeared in the surroundings. Countless experts were here. And Nanjing shot a glance into the sky, and then she tightened her grip on the black spear. Suddenly, a black-robed old man appeared 300 m away from them. The old man glanced at them and said, "Xianxu, I'm a guardian of this world. Is Xianxia inheriting that sword?" That sword. There was a sword in the sword ruins, and everyone knew about it. However, no one knew how strong it was. But now, along with that sword howl, they did. It was very strong, could fall into anyone's hands, but absolutely not Xianxia's. Once it fell into Xianxia's hands, it would be a calamity to Eternal Border. Xianxu nodded. "Yes, The black-robed man's eyes narrowed slightly. Jianyu, can you give me face and don't let him get it? So long as he doesn't get it, we guarantee that no one will break the rules of the sword ruins. Jianyu shook her head slightly. That sword is beyond my clan's control. The black-robed old man spoke solemnly. Jianyu, you should be aware of the enmity between us and Yang Yi. It isn't just the guardians, even the other powers won't let him live. If you help him, it's no different than going against all the powers of eternal border. Jianyu replied indifferently. If you have the ability, you can make that sword go with you. So long as you can accomplish that, I won't say anything about it. The black-robed old stated indifferently. Jianyu, out of consideration for your Jian clan, I'll give you one last chance. If you don't stop him, then I'll destroy the sword ruins. Jianyu raised the huge sword by her side. Give it a try. As soon as she finished speaking, countless strands of sword intent converged like a torrent toward her from all over the sword ruins. In an instant, her aura started to rise explosively while her sword intent started to increase madly as well. The black-robed old man's gaze gradually turned icy cold, and then he raised his right hand and slammed it down. In an instant, the ground throughout the sword ruins started to tremble. Suddenly, a Nanjing left the ground. The black-robed old man's eyes narrowed slightly, and a wisp of icy cold killing intent flashed within them. He'd been on guard against her from the very beginning, so he clenched his right fist slightly and twisted it. Bang! And Nanjing was stopped on the spot, and a huge spatial vortex appeared around her. The old man was trying to mince her apart. A wave of powerful energy was ceaselessly mincing apart everything there, including the ray of light Nanjing had transformed into earlier. Right when the light was about to be obliterated, a spear suddenly shot out of the vortex. Bang! The vortex exploded apart, and then the spear slammed against the old man. Boom! The old man was blasted over 3 kilometers away. As soon as he stopped himself, Nanjing appeared before him, and then her fist descended at his face. Her fist, the imposing aura it carried, was countless times more terrifying than the aura of the world, and it was simply horrifying. The old man was shocked. While he knew she was very strong, he'd still underestimated her strength. The old man didn't dare act carelessly in the slightest, and he immediately twisted his right hand, causing a pitch-black rope to flash out and circle up before slamming down at her. Bang! 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 Explosions resounded incessantly through the sky, and then a spear blasted the black rope into bits. Hiss! The spear tore through the air and shot at the old man. A wisp of ruthlessness flashed through his eyes as he slapped his palm forward. Bang! The world trembled before his palm. It carried the strength to destroy 3 worlds. However, the spear before him wasn't any weaker to this. As soon as they collided, the old man was pushed backward repeatedly. Suddenly, another spear shot at the old man. The old man was shocked and slapped his palm forward again. Hiss! The spear pierced through the old man's entire arm, and the powerful force within it blasted him 3 kilometers away. As soon as he stopped himself, Nanjing appeared before him again. This time, she didn't use her spear and just swung a kick at him. Bam! The old man didn't even have the ability to dodge or defend himself against it, and so her kick slammed straight against his chest. Crack! At this moment, the old man's chest and internal organs cracked open, and his figure was kicked away. Nanjing was about to attack again, when 2 powerful auras suddenly slammed down at her from both sides. 2 more 3-world realm experts. Coupled with the black-robed old man, there were 3 3-world realm experts now. Moreover, there were countless more experts watching from the shadows. In the clouds, Nanjing stretched her right hand behind her head and wrapped her ponytail around her neck. After that, she closed her eyes slowly. Ants! Bang! A powerful aura swept out from within her. The world trembled before her. Nanjing's aura grew more and more strong, and the space throughout the sword ruins started to boil violently like water. However, that wasn't the end of it. Her aura was still rising madly, and then a pressure that didn't conform to her realm of cultivation gradually appeared in the sky above the sword ruins. The Limit Breaker realm experts on either side of her were forced to a stop by the pressure and aura. Their eyes were filled with astonishment. Suddenly, a Nanjing hurled her spear to the right, and it shot forward like a bolt of lightning. Hiss! 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 Everywhere it passed, space was blasted into pieces, and it didn't take long for a huge hole to appear in the sky. The three-world realm expert it targeted was horrified. He didn't dare act carelessly at all. His profound energy surged out like the tide while a silver spear appeared in his grasp, and then it swept forward like a raging dragon leaving the ocean for battle. Boom! An explosion resounded, and the three-world realm expert was blasted over 10 kilometers away. As soon as he stopped, blood sprayed incessantly from his mouth while horrifying cracks covered the arm which he used to hold the spear. After she repulsed him with a single attack, and Nanjing turned around and slammed her fist forward. The imposing aura it carried seemed capable of obliterating the world. Boom! The space before Nanjing shook violently, and then a figure was blasted away. It was the three-world realm expert. After she repulsed the old man, she looked up at the black-robed old man from before. At this moment, a solemn expression covered the old man's face. And Nanjing's strength had far surpassed his expectations. Or it should be said to have absolutely surpassed everyone's expectations. She was really strong. And Nanjing didn't attack again and just returned to the mountaintop. Obviously, she was afraid of being led away. She refused to let anyone underground until Xianxia returned. In the sky, the black-robed old man's group didn't dare to attack again. The old man glanced at the sky and said, "Everyone, it isn't that we're not trying, but I'm sure you've noticed how strong she is. If you don't help, then just wait for Xianxia to inherit that sword." The sky remained silent. The old man laughed coldly, and he just closed his eyes slowly. He knew that someone would act because no one wanted to let Xianxia continue growing stronger. Xianxia was already able to instill fear in countless people. Wait, the old man was waiting until someone took action. Meanwhile, Nanjing sat cross-legged on the mountaintop, and two spears were by her side. Meanwhile, more and more powerful auras converged in the sky, and a suffocating wave of pressure appeared throughout the sword ruins. Suddenly, Sword Scroll appeared by Nanjing's side, and Snowy was on her shoulder. Snowy was holding a mirror in her paws. And Nanjing glanced at them and asked, "What about him?" Sword Scroll replied softly, "He needs some time." And Nanjing nodded. "All right." Sword Scroll looked up at the sky with a wisp of worry in her eyes. As for Snowy, she leaped onto Nanjing's shoulder, and she looked up into the sky with the mirror in her arms. No one knew what she was thinking. Deep underground, a sword howl resounded, and then Xianxia was blasted around 3 kilometers away. As soon as he stopped, blood seeped out slowly from the left side of his chest. A hole. At this moment, there were no less than 20 injuries throughout Xianxia's body, and every one of them was bone deep. If his body wasn't extremely strong, and if he didn't possess primordial violet energy, he would be dead by now. Even then, he was on the verge of being unable to hold on any longer. Yet now, he'd only defeated 2 sword cultivators. There were 10 more. Xianxia felt quite a bit of despair. True despair. He was merely facing the 3rd sword cultivator right now, but it was at least a 4-world realm expert. He'd been crushed the moment they fought. The black-robed sword cultivator before him didn't attack again upon pushing him back, and had just stopped on the spot instead. Xianxia knew the sword cultivator before him was waiting for him to attack. That was what happened earlier. The 3rd sword cultivator hadn't attacked upon appearing, but once he attacked, he was just suddenly pushed back. Or it should be said that if he hadn't reacted quickly enough, it would have killed him. That attack was simply like a shadow. Strong. This 4-world realm sword cultivator was truly strong. Xianxia glanced at his chest. The hole there was gradually healing up. Suddenly, Xianxia looked up at the black-robed sword cultivator, and then the sword gored by his waist shook violently. After that, a ray of light soundlessly appeared before the sword cultivator's throat. However, Xianxia's expression suddenly changed drastically. and he forcefully twisted his body to the side. Hiss! A strand of blood sprayed from his left shoulder. If he hadn't dodged quickly, it would have stabbed his throat. Once he stopped himself, Xianxia looked up at the black-robed man. At this moment, his flying sword had stopped just a few meters to the right of the black-robed man, and a sword was pressed against it. At the instant his flying sword shot forward earlier, the black-robed man had swung his sword twice. One to attack and one to defend himself. Xianxia fell silent for a long time, and then he tapped his right foot down and appeared before the black-robed man. After that, he swung his sword with both hands. The sword domain. For swings. He'd immediately used 4 swings. His ultimate attack. As soon as the 4th swing descended, a sword suddenly stabbed against the tip of his sword. A moment of silence ensued. Boom! A rumbling explosion resounded, and then Xianxia was blasted away with his sword. As for the black-robed man in front of him, the man had been pushed over 1 kilometer back as well. Cough! Xianxia started coughing intensely while gradually crawling up from the ground. Meanwhile, the black-robed sword cultivator had appeared not too far away from him. Xianxia wiped off the blood on the corner of his mouth and looked up at the black-robed sword cultivator. He felt powerless. He really felt quite powerless at this moment. The strength of this 4-world realm sword cultivator had far surpassed his own strength, and he was being completely surpassed. It was suppression in cultivation, in attainments of the sword Tao and strength itself. It was complete suppression. Could be said that he had no chance to win, but he had no chance to retreat either. He could only fight. Xianxia took a deep breath while his profound energy surged madly. Moreover, his profound primal energy started to circulate as well, causing the veins on his arms to gradually start bulging up. Strength. Pure strength. Boom! A terrifying wave of intent swept out from within him. Madness intent. As soon as his madness intent appeared, his sword intent and slaughter intent were instantly suppressed back into his body. Xianxia was very well aware that he was no match for the black-robed sword cultivator under normal circumstances, unless he stopped suppressing his cultivation and allowed it to rise. But even then, he may not be able to defeat the black-robed man after rising to the true world or even world lord realm. After all, he'd used his full strength just now, but the black-robed sword cultivator hadn't. Of course, there was another reason why he'd released his madness intent. It was because he wanted to give it a try. He wanted to try how strong it was when combined with his sword. Xianxia's mind wasn't very clear at this moment, and he held the sword precursor with both hands as he advanced swiftly and swung his sword at the black-robed sword cultivator. A single swing. As soon as it descended, a sword stabbed against the blade of his sword. Clang! An ear-piercing sound of collision resounded, and then Xianxia swung the sword again. In the past it had been the madness saber technique, yet now it was the madness sword technique. What was madness? It was utter insanity. At this moment, Xianxia had given up on defending himself, and he focused on just one thing. Attacking. Attacking like a madman. Simply speaking, he was fighting without any regard for his life. Sure enough, it was working. From being in a passive position in the beginning, he was gradually gaining the initiative. Of course, he paid a terrible price. At this moment, his body was covered in injuries, and every one of them was bone deep. However, the black-robed sword cultivator had started to be pushed back. He was being suppressed by Xianxia. At this moment, Xianxia had started to suppress the black-robed sword cultivator. Once he used his madness intent, Xianxia grew more and more insane as he fought, and fighting with no regard for his life allowed the strength of his attacks to grow increasingly stronger. Simply speaking, it was a form of aura, and he had the aura of someone who wouldn't stop until death took him. Of course, it came with a terrible price. The injuries throughout his body were increasing, and it seemed like he was suffering the punishment of death by 1,000 cuts. He was being cut up. Hiss! 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 The sound of skin being sliced open resounded incessantly, and the black-robed man was being pushed back incessantly. As for Xianxia, only rays of light could be seen but not his figure itself. Just like that, a long time passed before the space here had been sliced into countless pieces. At this moment, The black-robed man had been pushed over 30 kilometers away, and his body was growing increasingly ethereal. Finally, after an hour of fighting, a ray of sword energy descended, and the black-robed man was obliterated. However, Xianxia crashed to the ground as well. As soon as he fell, a puddle of blood appeared beneath him. Blood was flowing swiftly, and in huge amounts. Xianxia laid there in the pool of blood while his body twitched incessantly, and the madness intent around him gradually surged back within him. It was part of a deal he'd made with the madness intent. Could come out, but it had to return when he wanted it to. Otherwise, he would suppress it forever. Simply speaking, he could control it now. Once the madness intent vanished, another black-robed sword cultivator appeared nearby. The sword cultivator's aura was much stronger and terrifying than the last. However, Xianxia waved his hand and said, "I am stopping. I don't want it anymore."